Wait, you have a TV?
No. I just like to read the TV guide. Read the TV guide. You don't need a TV.
Television addict! Television addict! Television addict!
Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's time for a brand new edition of TV Guidance Counselor. I am Ken Reed. I am your TV Guidance Counselor, the Boston-based stand-up comedian who's done this weekly podcast about classic television since 2014. I hesitated when I said stand-up comedian because there isn't a lot of stand-up going on. Haven't done it about 6 months because we're in a global pandemic that's ending the world. But I guess I could say I am still a stand-up comedian, I suppose, although I'm sitting down right now. This show is the show where I welcome a guest. We discuss the difficult viewing choices of our collective past using back issues of TV Guide magazine from my personal collection. And this week might be my absolute favorite episode I've done yet since I've started doing these remote sessions due to lockdown, and it sort of expanded the realm of guests that I can have. This week we travel to England, to London in fact, and my guest is the amazing Jo Brand. Jo is a stand-up comic, but she's an author. She's written both fiction and non-fiction books, autobiographical books, super smart, super funny. People in the US, you may have seen her on some of the panel shows that have made it over here, like QI. She also wrote and starred in the show Getting On, which was remade here. I haven't seen the remake yet, but the original is unbelievably good, and I have talked about it on the show before. So it was just such a pleasure to get to sit down and chat with her, and she was very game for doing this. We went the TV Guide for 1968, a US TV Guide, so there's a lot of stuff she'd never seen before, but that was just great fuel for the discussion. So you're going to love this episode. I love this episode. Everybody loves this episode. You find me someone who doesn't love it, and I will, I don't know what I'll do, and you know what? Don't go out of your way to do that. I'm sure there are people, but it's a good episode. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's episode of TV Guidance Counselor with my guest, Jo Brand.
TV is my friend, and it has been always there for me in time of need.
Jo Brand, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Ken. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm very excited to talk to you. I am a big fan of your work, and this is a lot of fun for me. So some good things have come out of the global pandemic that's ending the world.
Yeah, this is probably quite a long way down the list, I should think, in terms of the good things. Thanks very much, anyway.
For me, at least. When I asked about you in the show, you asked for an issue from 1968, and I do have some TV times and radio times, but I did not have some from 1968, so I sent you a U.S. TV Guide from that year, which is probably a bit of a mysterious totem at this point.
Well, yeah, it's kind of been interesting. I mean, I was quite surprised that there were a few things that I recognised at all. Not really my cup of tea, but I was kind of the middle child of three of us, and I have two brothers, so they forced me to watch a lot of the TV that's in this. It's kind of like a lot of military stuff.
Yep.
A lot of kind of
westerns.
Westerns, loads of westerns. The High Chaparral was one that I remember very well. Bonanza, that actually wasn't, I'm not that old.
Right.
I think Bonanza was on TV before TV was even invented, to be honest. Oh yeah, Hogan's Heroes, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, so we'll get through them. There's it's funny because too, if I had gotten TV time, I would have needed a radio and TV times, even though there was only 3 channels in 1968, because you have the 2 BBC and the 1 ITV, which I think started in 55. But so in some respects, you got a lot more choices here with this issue, even if it's nothing that is interesting to watch.
Exactly. So that was good. I mean, you know, the absolute... I don't think of myself as old because I'm so adolescent and badly behaved, to be honest, but I can't believe that my existence has straddled such extremes of media, because looking at the TV that's available, it is shit, really. Yeah. I'm not saying it's shit because it's American. It's just shit, really. And because it was like that when I was a kid as well. When you look at the choice that you have these days, you know, stuff in colour.
Yeah.
But it's just so weird for me looking back and thinking, I'm not a 300-year-old person. Why do I know all about that stuff? It looks so medieval.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I mean, we'll go through in a moment here, but even just before some of the listings, some of the cultural stuff in here, which 1968, obviously in the world and in the United States was a huge political year and with many parallels to today. But it doesn't feel like, to your point, that long ago. But when you look in here, I mean, some of the stuff, it's later in the issue, but they're promoting the issue for next week. And they're like, next week, it's an issue. And I think it is, the exact wording is, we see what the Negro wants to watch on TV.
Oh, that's unbelievable, isn't it?
It's
I know.
insane.
You cannot believe that life has changed beyond recognition in the way that it has. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a fascinating article in here, too. And I don't know if you bothered to look at this one, but it looks a little dry. But it's about how Soviet television presents the U.S.
Oh, I did. I read that. I found that really fascinating. Yeah.
And my wife is English. She's from Stafford. And when she moved over here, she was shocked to see all the 80s Cold War entertainment we had here, where the Soviets were presented as this just pure evil empire, because it wasn't necessarily presented that way in the UK. It was kind of like the UK is going to be the victim of a US and Soviet war here.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think obviously the Russians kind of, from what that article said, were giving as good as they got, really, because they remarked at one point, I think, that actually the fact that America was supposed to be a democracy was a complete sham, and it was in fact a dictatorship, which I kind of quite like the idea. And I really like the idea that the Statue of Liberty, of all things, is apparently giving a fascist salute. Did you realise that?
I had no idea, but I'm also, a victim of U.S. brainwashing. So I see it all the time, and that fascist salute just didn't hit me till I was deprogrammed. And then there's a really weird fiction piece in here that's presented Dracula style as a series of letters of this housewife having a battle with a network and writing back and forth complaining.
Really surreal stuff. Again, I kind of can't quite believe, if you look at the sort of thing that is in kind of TV magazines these days, and let's face it, the paper saw aren't going to be in existence for much longer, are they? It's just so far beyond.
One of the things that struck me too, I think the first thing I saw you on was there was a stand-up show called London Underground, which aired here on Comedy Central.
Okay.
And I believe I saw your stand-up on that, but it struck me because especially your earlier stuff was sort of very pop culture-ish. Like you got a lot of references and that sort of things in it, when it was sort of more one-linery, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. In between the man-hating.
Fair enough.
Well, to be honest with you, I think the sort of right-wing tabloid newspapers over here, they just seized on the fact that I took the piss out of men.
Yeah, I mean, somebody had to.
How would you say that in Americanese? The Mickey took the...
You'd say like, it depends on the region. Here in the Boston area, you'd see be like busting men's balls.
Right. Oh, okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I like that much better.
Yeah.
To be honest. Yeah.
And gender appropriate.
Absolutely.
It's a nice visual.
When I started off, there was a London kind of comedy circuit with probably about 250 people on it, and 15 of us were women. So it was kind of an interesting time, really. So we were all judged completely under the same umbrella. We didn't have any individuality. We were just either extremes of a sort or not extreme. We were kind of rather sweet and nice, but we were all sort of the same, really. Sadly,
I don't know if it's still this way in the UK, but in the US, not that different these days in scenes that I've encountered when I've been doing stand-up. It's getting better, but you still have the things where a booker's like, well, I already have one woman on the show, so audience is going to be like, two? What is this?
Oh, I know. Well, I remember at the Comedy Store, like years ago, we did an all-women show. And, all the male comics that were free that night came down to see it because they obviously thought it was going to be absolute crap and we would all be terrible. So they were all at the back and arms folded, just waiting for the whole thing to implode. And it actually went rather all right, you know, and and I think they were very disappointed, really, because it didn't prove, after all, that we were terrible.
Well, it was, I guess it was labeled as an alt scene that you sort of came out of, and I mostly know that from like the Young Ones guys, which is the show that just changed my life. Seeing that when it
bless
came
you,
on.
did it? I know, yeah. I loved the Young Ones.
I've told it on the show before, but MTV aired the Young Ones in a block with the Monkees here, which makes sense.
Oh, okay.
And I never slept when I was a kid, and so one night I was flipping through the channels, and I stumbled upon The Damned playing Video Nasty on the Young Ones, and I was like, I don't know what this is, but there's a vampire singing fast music and it's funny, and this is everything I like in life.
It was amazing. Yeah.
But there were, a lot of women got some opportunities from that scene. So like, French and Saunders showed up in that early on.
Yeah.
So not amazingly showcased, but still more than we were getting here from stand-up.
And French and Saunders, are they known in the States?
Absolutely Fabulous was massive here.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
To the point where Roseanne remade it in a weird backdoor fashion. But so people know Jennifer Saunders better than Dawn French.
Yeah.
And they know the names. They aired some French and Saunders stuff to fill time between AbFab episodes because they were a weird time.
Okay.
But they're not obviously anywhere near what they are in the UK, where they're just these comedy institutions. Sure. It's interesting to see what makes it over here and what doesn't.
Well, I know, I find that really fascinating as well. And I was thinking, while I was looking through all the stuff that was on, like these days, it's kind of interesting because quite a lot of British comedy is remade for the States, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Getting On.
Yeah, absolutely. But we don't tend to do it the other way around because we haven't got any money.
It's really weird. There's a few instances I can think of, like I think it was called not Man About the House. There was a show here called Who's the Boss in the 80s. It was a sitcom with they called it the Manny genre because this guy was like the housekeeper and he lived with
right, okay,
and they remade that in the UK using the same exact scripts.
Really?
From the US one, and it is weird. Like, it's real weird because normally I'm used to the other way around. Like, Dear John got remade here and took away all the sadness and that existential dread of that show. We not clean things up, but we tend to make them less. The thing I love about UK shows is the comedies tend to be a very natural outgrowth of comedy as a gallows humor, or it comes from coping with difficult situation a lot of times. And when we adapt those here, we just erase that part.
Yeah, fair enough.
So it's like even Sanford and Son, which is about a junk man and remade from Steptoe and Son, like they still have a pretty nice house. Like they don't seem like they live in a junkyard,
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I noticed that when I transferred over to the States, I became younger, thinner, much more attractive and black, which was interesting. So there you go.
Were you involved with the translation at all, or was it kind of
not as much as the other two writers, Vicky and Joe, were, because I had like other stuff that I had to get on with, and so they were able to sort of travel over. So I was kind of in the background, just shouting and leaving abusive messages for them, and they were doing sort of the bulk of the stuff over here. So yeah,
one major difference I've noticed is that in the UK, you're allowed to have the people who create the show actually be in it.
Yeah.
Whereas,
does that not happen with you?
No. I mean, I remember I was auditioning for like the 100th time for Just for Laughs, and one of the producers told me, the quote was, "Look, we can get someone funnier than you to write something for someone better looking than you."
Oh, how lovely.
And I'm like, I know that's true, but I think that's sort of the attitude.
I think that's kind of interesting. And I think obviously in films that happens a lot. I mean, I remember someone telling me a story about they were remaking a British film over there, and they wanted to put the original female actor in, but she wasn't attractive enough, and so someone suggested somebody else, and they went, "Oh yeah, all right, but we can't go any uglier than her."
Oh my God.
I just thought, God, thank God she's not heard that. In a way, it's so kind of pragmatic, isn't it? It's almost as if that person is wouldn't have any feelings, and
Right.
they're judging it on a totally practical level.
Yeah, like what will the audience respond to just based visually?
Exactly.
Obviously, it's not easy to do, but in the UK, it seems like you can earn your spot a little more easily by just doing something good.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Although, people over here, they are offended if you're not attractive.
Yeah.
So you get plenty of that kind of shit thrown at you.
Yeah.
Just, into the bargain. But at least they've offered you it in the first place so you can actually be there and have all that abuse. So,
Right.
Swings and roundabouts, as they say.
We let you get abused? What's your
Yeah.
problem?
Exactly. Shut up.
Couldn't handle it. It's very, very strange. Have you ever done stand-up over here? Have you ever worked in the US and anything? I don't remember you.
Can I tell you something which in this day and age is appalling? I've never been to the US.
Ever?
No.
Wow. You're not missing much.
Well, you say that. I mean, I've been to the Montreal Comedy Festival twice. I don't know, opportunities to go over, and the awful thing that I kind of feel like I'm not really like a lot of other comics. I couldn't kind of really care less. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So what I've done in my life is I've just taken the easiest option. So I've never thought, I must go over for, what do they call it? Pilot season.
Yeah.
I must go and try it over there. And I've kind of watched people like Billy Connolly in the past, who obviously is a comedy icon over here.
Yeah.
And other people going over with the kind of intention of making it. And I just always thought, it all looks a bit hard work to me.
It does, though. And I mean, you're a person after my own heart. So, but you don't get to be you, really. Like Billy Connolly's a great example where he was put in a sitcom, replaced an actor in a sitcom where he played a teacher in this classroom for gifted youth, and then got a spin-off called Billy where he was like a crazy single guy renting a room from a single widower. And it just wasn't, it's not what you want from Billy Connolly. It's not.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
He got paid well, and a lot of people saw it, but that's not creatively.
But did people like it?
People enjoyed it, but I think it's a little different now, but especially in the 80s and 90s, the way people here especially consumed media and especially sitcoms was very passive. So it was almost like visual wallpaper. Can we just kind of throw it on and it's just pleasant enough that we can be like, I like that, but they weren't really passionate about it. It wasn't really something that they went out of their way to watch. There were a few exceptions where shows like Twin Peaks or something.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But
I mean, you were at Goldsmiths College in South East London, weren't you?
Yep.
I mean, so did you? I actually did my first ever gig at the Goldsmiths Tavern.
Me too.
Did you?
Yes, yeah.
How was that?
It was interesting. I had to be introduced as Canadian because of the Iraq War and Afghanistan. Like people were like,
wow,
"We can't."
really?
And the whole time I did stand up in the UK, I had to be introduced as Canadian. And one time I was like, "Oh, come on," and I couldn't get a word out. It was at Up the Creek, and I was like, "I'm American. Come on."
God,
And,
well, you picked the wrong place to experiment there,
Yeah.
because Up the Creek is infamous, the kind of whole countrywide, for being such a hard venue to do, mainly because the audience, first of all, they think they're hilariously funny, and secondly, they don't judge people on their merit. They just randomly decide to destroy someone. For example, I don't know if people over there know who Harry Enfield is.
Here's the funny thing. We know Harry Enfield from Burger King commercials he did.
Oh, right, okay.
That's
Well, yeah,
the only
fair
thing he
enough.
did over here.
Wow, how interesting. Well, he was, he's a brilliant sort of stand-up, and he was on there one night and he was booed off within, like, I don't know, maybe a minute, whereas a guy went on after him who'd never been there before, and he did a joke for 10 minutes in Serbo-Croat, and he got 3 encores. So that they just completely unpredictably and randomly decided to hate Harry Enfield and to love this guy who was hopeless and really, really bad. So that's the way it was there.
The new Cross Tavern show you did wasn't Big Night Out. It was prior to that, right? Was it the...
Yeah, it was prior to that,
Yeah. It was probably the stand-up show that Vic Reeves took over to do Big Night Out, I think.
Yes, I think it was, yeah. I mean, I think it wasn't that long before Vic Reeves took it over, actually, and when I did it. But I remember it so well because I had a joke at the time which I thought was brilliant and no one else ever did. And I used to put a blood capsule in my mouth and I wore like a white T-shirt and I would go on stage, cough, and it looked like a load of blood. I coughed a load of blood all over my T-shirt and then I'd go, oh, must give up smoking. And nobody ever laughed. But I persevered for quite a long time and, it never worked. I dropped it in the end, but I think it was just too horrible, really.
When I would go on stage and if I coughed or if I had a cold or something, I would always, and I could have just ignored it, but for some reason I would always look at my hand and go, oh, good, no TB. And it never got a laugh.
I love that sort of thing.
It never got a laugh. And then like I'd feel challenged and I'd have to like continue with it. So sometimes I'd be like, I'm just a big Doc Holliday fan and I've been trying or something like that,
Yeah.
No, never. They never enjoyed that. But these are the things we do. You were in series 1 episode, I think, of Shooting Stars. Speaking of Vic and Bob.
Oh, I was indeed. Yes.
I love that show. When I was going to Goldsmiths, I stole cable and on UK Gold or something, they showed Shooting Stars. And I had never seen anything like that in my life. And I was just like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
Has there ever been anything sort of since like that in the States?
They've tried to do panel shows here. And they even tried to remake Nevermind the Buzzcocks with Mark Maron in the Mark Lamar role. And it was terrible. I don't know why.
Why is that, I wonder?
I don't know why. It's very strange where I love how stand-ups are used in the UK in that stand-ups are on TV constantly, but you rarely see someone actually doing stand-up on TV in the UK.
Okay, well, that's interesting as well.
So you get a fan base and people go, I love Jo Brand, I love how her sense of humor, I'll go see her do stand-up, even though I've never seen her do it. And here, they pretty much only have stand-ups on doing stand-up and that's it.
Right.
It's weird.
Okay.
I don't know if it's just like and I know the panel shows have some scripting and obviously there's a ton of editing, but I don't know if there's too much of a X factor, improv factor that the studios are just like, we'd rather just know exactly what's going on. I don't know.
Well, but there's a few, like there's a few shows over here where they are scripted to within an inch of their life, but that's very few.
Yeah.
But most of them, the host is scripted and nobody else is at all, And it is a risk, I suppose, because if you're having an off day and you're really bad, they just have to suck that up because it happens to everyone. I suppose it is a bit risky, really. It was funny, I was watching American Gogglebox last night with my daughter and I've never seen it before. That has a totally different quality to it from the English one, I think, from the British one. Yeah. Have you seen them both?
I've seen the British one, but I'm certain the US one does. I don't know, I won't say this universally, but it's not irony, but it's a snarkiness that we'll have here that doesn't come across as genuine or as sort of charming as it can in the UK. And I don't know if that's I'll get all cinema studies and I apologize, but like, I don't know if that's
all right.
I don't know if that's the inherent class system stuff in the UK where everybody sort of feels... Everyone can sort of sympathize with blue collar a little bit, I guess, or there's sort of more of a, not like we're all shit, but like everyone's kind of, people don't generally do stuff and be like, I'm doing this to feel better than this person or something from comedy. Whereas here it kind of is in a weird way. Like it's a snarky sort of punchy down, like a little bit when you do shows like that. And so it's hard to get the tone that doesn't seem too mean.
The impression that I got was that, I could be wrong here, but that in the UK one, people are trying much harder to be funny, even though they're not comedians. Whereas there's some people, I thought, on the American one that you kind of got the message from them, look, I'm here, isn't that enough?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
or it's competitive. Like people here would rather win than be funny sometimes. Even if the game is completely arbitrary nonsense.
Yeah.
They'll
Isn't
be
that
like,
interesting?
I'm gonna win. I don't care. And it's weird. It's weird. It definitely, having started in the UK doing stand-up, and weirdly, like, I'm a pop culture junkie, and I think if I had started here, my stuff would be would have incorporated that stuff more early on, but because I had to be more universal, my stuff's more like stories about my family and growing up.
Yeah.
It really struck me as a weird difference when I came back, because I had that year or whatever of having started doing it there. And I think there's a different mentality. I always say people are career ambitious here rather than creatively ambitious.
Yeah, well, I remember going to the Montreal Comedy Festival. Did you ever go there?
No, I've never gone. I've never been to Canada.
Oh, have you not?
I could drive there now. It's a couple hours. Yeah.
Mr. Canadian.
Yes.
You've never been to Canada.
I know.
I went there and I tried to do a load of topical material about Britain invading Iraq, and they didn't have a fucking clue that we'd done that, so I just stopped doing it because people were like looking at me like, what are you talking about?
I think it was Greg Proops said to me once, where he was like, on a thing like that, he was like, they haven't done the reading. like they're not going to be caught up.
Yeah, I think it is very different, isn't it? Yeah, you're right.
It's people too have this weird, like, hey, entertain me kind of thing, instead of like, I don't want to think about anything. Just do the dance,
Yeah, you can't blame people in a way for that. I think maybe some people that do we really want to hear which war you want to talk about tonight, or
right.
Or some murder that everyone's talking about. No, I can sort of understand that.
I think it's Stuart Lee had that like 20-minute thing about the Montreal Comedy Festival where he was just like, you can go and you can see an American comic say, my mother is Irish and my father is Italian. So when I see a pint of Guinness, I don't know whether to drink it or stick it up my ass.
Yeah.
And he's like, and you'll see that 25 times an hour by putting on. I'm like, that's shockingly accurate. Shockingly accurate. So let's dive in here a little bit. On Saturday night, did anything strike your fancy?
Well, I've no idea what it is, but I thought it sounded intriguing. There was something on called the Newlywed Game.
Yes.
Do you know what that is? I haven't got a clue, but I thought I'd like to see that.
The Newlywed Game is a very strange game. I'm trying to think if it was ever translated to the UK, and I don't think it ever was. But what they would do is they'd get 3 newlywed couples, they'd separate them, they'd ask them questions about their partner, and then when the person would come back, they'd try to guess what their partner said about them.
Oh, well, we have one like that over here. It's called Mr. and Mrs.
Yes.
But it's not newlyweds. It's people that have been together for like donkey's years, hundreds of years. And it seems to be the longer they've been together, the less they know about each other.
Yeah.
So I think newlyweds is probably a good road to go down.
One of the reasons that was newlyweds too was because they could just ask a bunch of sex questions, really.
Of course.
One of the most infamous game show bloopers of all time happened on the Newlywed Game. And it was in the late 70s. And for a long time, it was an urban legend. People thought it didn't happen, but somebody dug up the footage. And Newlywed Game, instead of saying sex, they would always use the term whoopee. So like making whoopee.
Yeah.
So the question was, what's the strangest place you and your wife have ever made whoopee? And the guy goes, in the butt. And so the host was like, and so people swore up and down they saw this on TV. Everyone was like, that never happened. And it was only like a couple years ago, someone's like, this happened. Here's the footage.
That's so interesting because that same legend exists as a British story as well.
Oh, really?
In which instead of saying in the butt, whoever it was said up the arse, which is obviously a British similar area. Yeah, isn't that weird? That's I always thought that was true for Britain. So the fact that the footage has been dug up means that it wasn't over here, but how interesting.
These are our modern fairy tales.
Indeed. Aren't they great?
Yes. That's how we teach the children about story.
I'd much rather have a fairy tale about anal sex than, I was going to say a goblin, but that's a bit too close.
I'm not so sure a lot of the fairy tales aren't about that.
No, I'm sure you're right, Ken, absolutely.
Yeah, so you did have Mr. and Mrs., so it makes sense that it was translated. They even did a children's version of the Newlywed Game.
Oh, that sounds slightly weird.
Very weird. The way that they translated it was brothers and sisters, and they called it "I'm Telling." And it was but the same format. You know, they didn't ask Whoopi questions, but thank God. But and they've brought that show back time and time again.
So it worked, did it?
Yeah.
It worked okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating car wreck of a show.
So I'm right to choose that.
Yeah.
Then.
Anything else you had on Saturday?
Yeah. Now, my three sons, the reason that I picked this was because of the description of the plot, which was Uncle Charlie tries to make amends for hollering at Katie by staging a ladies' tea party in his usual heavy-handed way. Well, now, I've never heard of anything remotely like that being done by someone to apologise for something. You know, you go, oh, I'm so sorry I've run over your foot. I'll stage a gentleman's tea party for you to make amends.
Court-ordered ladies' tea parties.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes, the court has ordered you all attend a tea party. So anyway, tell me about that.
My Three Sons is an interesting show. It was on for 13 years.
Wow.
And these are 13 American TV years, so we're talking 24 episodes a year for 13 years.
Oh, my word.
And we saw the kids in this show literally go from age 3 to get married and have their own kids on the show.
Oh, my Lord.
Very strange. So it was about a widower who had 3 sons, and Uncle Charlie is his uncle who comes in and tries to help him raise the kids. But it's interesting because they, from like a gender roles standpoint, and we're talking 1968, Uncle Charlie played the role of the woman in the family. So he would do all the cooking and cleaning and all the sort of traditional housewife stuff.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And it was usually played for laughs, as you would imagine, because he was like a gruff Navy vet, you know.
Yeah.
But there's an episode, I forget the exact thing. One of the kids is having trouble in school, and Uncle Charlie... Oh, no, I know what it is. They're going to adopt the neighbor's son because he hangs out there all the time, and he's a foster kid or something. And the adoption agency won't adopt a kid to a single-family household. And so Uncle Charlie goes in there with the dad, and they make the argument that they have a 2-parent home.
Right.
And that he serves all this function. And he gives this speech about how he's proud to do the cooking and the cleaning and raise these kids and all this stuff. And they approve the adoption. But it's a really weird sentiment for that time. It's, you know, it's obviously not, it's not a gay couple, and they're not, you know, it's still coded in the 60s. But it's bizarre.
Yeah, I think they had to sort of have like weird ways around it. Like we had a show over here. You may have seen it when you were here, called Morecambe and Wise.
Yes, Eric and Ernie.
Eric and Ernie. Well, the thing about that was that they used to do loads of sketches where they were in bed together,
right.
Like, you know. And again, it was they weren't. It wasn't implying they were a gay couple or there was anything going on. That was just their sort of comedy life, you know. And one would have like a nightcap on, and they both have their sort of like, you know, old men's pajamas on. Right. And that was felt to be like totally innocent. But it was so odd, really. Yeah,
it's very strange that like 2 best buddies are just hanging out in bed together.
Yeah.
We're such good friends that this is...
Absolutely, yeah.
Or it might have been socioeconomic. They could only afford the one bed. I don't know the times. Anything else on Saturday?
I thought maybe Hogan's Heroes, and that was just with a nod to my brothers who would have... We did actually have that over here, so my brothers did love stuff like that. I fucking hated it, but, you know, to remind me of them, I thought I'd better put it on, really.
Was that... Because that's a beloved show here. And
oh, is it? Right, okay.
I think World War II here is looked at, well, I know it's looked at very differently than it was looked at in the UK, especially in 1968, which we're only, 25 years.
Yeah, not that far away from it, absolutely.
And so it definitely wasn't, my impression is, it definitely wasn't a figure of fun that you would have a sitcom necessarily about in the UK. I mean, when I went to Goldsmith, there were still some buildings in New Cross that were bombed out.
Yeah, how interesting.
This is bizarre. And so I'm actually kind of surprised it aired in the UK and that it was watched. I feel like it, may have been not as widely accepted, but that's
I think it was probably better accepted by kind of younger generations who hadn't actually had any experience of it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, as you say, this country just experienced it right on their doorstep, really. So people were down sort of tube stations hiding, and there were houses just being flattened every night, and particularly London got it really badly. Whereas I suppose your only experience in a way was Pearl Harbor, wasn't it, of any kind of
and that was even very abstract. I wasn't there, so I don't know, obviously I don't know how
we not
but I know I have a weird haircut, but we looked at it as a boom. Post World War II America, that's what built the modern America. We had this huge, that's what made us a superpower. So it was seen as this, the 50s were seen as this huge boom time, and it was not that World War II was good, but it was almost seemed like that war really, kicked us in the ass and we got this big thing going. Whereas, you still had rationing in the UK, and so you had those effects long lasting, and we just didn't. The only effects we had were sort of positive.
Yeah.
So it's
very different take on it, wasn't it, really? Yeah, absolutely.
So an odd show to watch in the UK, and like you, not a show I enjoy. It's not a great show. It's pretty ridiculous and not in an enjoyable way.
No, there was a line, and I think, I don't know whether this is like a common kind of trope. It says Hogan has to go back to the States and is replaced by British bumbler Colonel Crittenden. Yeah. So I quite like the fact that there's a lot of British bumblers. I know exactly what they mean by that. So Hogan was obviously, the cheeky kind of funny, young, etc. But British soldiers were all kind of bumbling old farts, really.
Yeah, it was like, he's stuck up, and he's doing it. He's got a map out, and he's like, and
a monocle.
Yeah, and I'm Hogan.
And he went to Eton. Yeah,
and then I'm Hogan. I'm gonna punch him out. It's that kind of thing. Which is always funny. And there's actually a character who's played by Richard Dawson on Hogan's Heroes, who was like the Cockney guy.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah. And he went on to host our version of Family Feud.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Well, obviously the Cockney guy, proud tradition started by Dick Van Dyke and Mary Poppins. So,
incredibly authentic Cockney.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Love that film when I was a kid.
It is a great movie. Whenever I had attempted to do an English accent, I was told it was like sub Dick Van Dyke. Although weirdly, my Boston accent got really strong when I lived in London.
Really?
And I assume it's just the certain words were similar enough that it sort of, subconsciously triggered that out. But that surprised me. It was weird.
Wow. Well, isn't that Boston's Cheers, isn't it?
Yes.
Right, yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong,
yeah.
But yes.
I mean, did you ever watch Cheers?
I did, and I do think that the really interesting story about Cheers to me, because it's just so bizarre, was the story about the actor that went for the Woody Harrelson job and didn't get it. He was up against, I think there were two of them left for the job, and that guy ended up being sort of horribly killed by a bear. Do you know that story?
I've heard,
it's just such an awful story, but just that really weird connection of the kind of light-heartedness of Cheers and of nearly getting that job, and then him just absolutely descending into kind of semi sort of, emotional disturbance because of failing to get that job right at the last minute. Yeah. And then that appalling thing happening to him, because of course the awful thing about it was that there was some sort of sound recording going on which just captured the whole thing, which is just unthinkable, really. But
it is weird.
I'm a weird person because that's when I connect with Cheers, which is totally inappropriate, really, isn't it?
Well, there's also the whole alcoholism.
Oh wow, and that yes,
because I mean, at its core, that show is about alcoholics and how alcoholism is this great unifier, which is the thing that always struck me, because you have someone like the Frasier character who's literally a doctor, he's a psychiatrist, but he's in that bar with a mailman and blue collar people, because they're all alcoholics. They're all sort of in the same place. So that obviously it's in a much brighter way, but I guess if I compare it to a show like Early Doors or something like that, which is such a different tone, because the pub has sort of more like it's almost like a familial, it's almost like a sweet thing about a pub rather than like I don't know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I think pubs can be so many different things, can't they? I used to work full time in a pub for about a year, and to me, it was just a sort of social centre for people that were a bit lonely. It didn't really have anything to do with drinking at all. I used to find the first 2 hours of when the pub opened really difficult because people just come and sit at the bar and just talk at me for like 2 hours until I wanted to stab myself in the throat.
Which is how you got your psychiatric nursing degree. They just gave it to you after that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, you've done the work here.
Yeah, you're in.
But it's like in the US, if you go to a bar in the day, you have some serious problems. And if you
really?
go to a
Yeah.
pub in the middle of the day, that seems more normal. You could bring a kid to a pub and it would seem less weird.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. That is
Yeah.
very interesting. I didn't know about that difference either.
Oh, yeah. Growing up, my uncles, like I would get dropped with them so they could babysit. And it was usually why they were like tending bar or something. So it was just
Right.
like, that is not a place for children. It's like, it's very different. So, and I don't drink. I've never drank. And when I moved to the UK, I would hang out at a pub. I'm like, this is just kind of a nice, kind of casual atmosphere, and it's just fun. And it was really shocking to me. It was like,
How interesting. Yeah. So weird.
anything else on Saturday, or did you move on to Sunday?
On Saturday, I just finally, just because there was a name I recognised there, but well, and a couple in fact, but the Hollywood Palace, which seems to have been some sort of variety show, was it? Like
Yep.
a music and comedy show. Bing Crosby hosting it. Obviously, icon for
Yep.
so many people, incredible.
Most people know him as David Bowie's singing partner.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah, that was a weird road for Bowie to go down,
Very
wasn't it?
strange.
But yeah,
But
no
that-
one knows why he did that.
And I read too that I think it was him that insisted on the new verse in that version. The whole like peace on earth.
Oh,
That's not
yeah.
it. And Bowie was like, I want to showcase my voice better. It was like, what? But Hollywood Palace was a weird show because we had a ton of variety shows then. Jackie Gleason Hour was probably the biggest one at the time, or Ed Sullivan. But they were usually built around a personality. So they were a person's name. And the
Right.
Hollywood Palace was built around a location, and it had a different host every week. So they would build the show anew every week. Like there's one that Frankie and Annette of the Beach Party movies host, and it's all like a beach theme thing. And
Oh, okay.
so you never knew what you were going to get with that show because it was a completely different vibe pretty much every week, which was really unusual for that time. And you have like Fred Astaire is in this one, Jack Benny, Louis Armstrong,
Yeah,
Nat King
unbelievable.
Cole, Betty Davis, which is, I don't know what she was doing.
Yeah, what was she doing? That is weird.
Yeah.
I suppose, see, Morecambe and Wise, their guests were kind of much more down market than that in a way. They were like Angela Rippon, who's a newsreader,
Right.
you know.
Carry on people or
Yeah, exactly. You had Betty Davis, we had Angela Rippon, God bless her. She was great. She was a really good dancer and she did really good dancing, But yeah, I also noticed Milton Berle was on
yes.
this one. And I had an encounter with him at the Montreal Comedy Festival. Brief, but I was backstage. I'd just done a sound check. He arrived because he was the sort of special guest, and he walked towards me, and for no reason whatsoever, I had my arms folded, and he went, "Hey, girly," which I liked, obviously.
Of course.
Girly. Don't worry, I'm not going to touch your titties. And I was like, oh, okay.
He was notoriously a piece of shit. Yes.
Oh, there you go. He was in my diary that night.
There's a book I recommend everybody called The Comedians, and it's written by my friend Cliff Nestoroff, who a Canadian guy, and it's a book about the history of comedy in America post vaudeville but pre 1980s. So it's all these stand-ups like Milton Berle who worked for the mob, and
wow.
there are some amazing stories in there. Milton Berle was just like a toady, just like a complete, he stole from everybody, and he would do a show with you, and then he'd come up to you after and go, I liked this bit and this bit, and you'd be all thanks, and he goes, yeah, they're mine. And he'd be like, what are you talking about? He'd be like, yeah, they're mine now. And there's nothing you could do about it. And everybody hated him. Everybody hated him. My favorite story about him is I love Phil Silvers. One of my all-time favorites.
I love Phil Silvers. Oh, brilliant.
Amazing. And Phil Silvers was the kind of guy who just didn't like bullies. He didn't like people who were assholes. And he was a pathological gambler. So on the set of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, they didn't have dailies because it was shot in Super 70 millimeter. It would have been too expensive and whatever. So they're in the makeup trailer one day and Milton Berle shows up late and everybody hates him. And Phil Silvers turns to one of the other actors and he goes, I bet you $20 that I can make Milton call his agent without saying a word to him. And they're like, fine, we'll take it. So Milton Berle, it's amazing. So Milton Berle comes in and he's getting his makeup done and Phil Silvers turns to the person next to him and just starts talking about the dailies. And he's like, I think in the dailies yesterday, you look like, we should. And he sees Milton Berle listening. And then he hears Milton pulls off his, his makeup thing. And he goes out and he gets on the payphone and he's on the phone with his agent. He's like, how come everyone's seeing these fucking dailies except me? And so he's like,
how brilliant.
Thank you. I'll take my $20. But yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So you're notoriously just an awful person. He was one of the few people banned from ever appearing on SNL again on Saturday Night Live.
Oh, really?
He hosted.
What did he do?
He hosted in 1983. And he was such a miserable bastard to everyone that they were just like, he's not even allowed in the building anymore. Like he was just awful.
Well, weirdly, it feels like in retrospect, he was actually being quite nice to me.
Yeah, you made out well. Yeah. I mean, unless, I don't know if after he met you, he was going on stage talking about the Iraq war for a while and using your bits, but
yeah, let's hope so.
Uncle Milty. Yeah, not a good guy. There's also mass for shut-ins on Sunday. There's a ton of church stuff on Sunday, I noticed. I don't know if that's...
Oh, right. No, yeah. So that's on my Saturday. And what did I go for? On Sunday, a bit of Ed Sullivan. Again, amazing guest, Duke Ellington. It's just like some weird... You kind of can't believe that those amazing people just did something as sort of normal as being on a TV show, really.
Yeah, they're sort of legendary. Like, they don't seem like real people in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
I had a guy named Steve Binder on, and he produced and directed the Elvis 68 comeback special.
Wow.
And he was telling me about it like that's just a normal thing. Like, yeah, and I said to Elvis, and I'm like, you can't just say that.
Wow.
Yeah, just amazing. It's so weird to me that those were real people and they just did stuff.
Exactly, absolutely.
Yeah.
I still can't kind of quite believe that they did that. And then Smothers Brothers, I've never even heard of that.
Oh,
but it's a sketch show, I think, is it?
Yes, they were amazing. They're still around. They were these two brothers who, on the surface, were doing sort of vaudeville comedy songs and two-man acts, who's on first type stuff. But they were incredibly subversive. And they actually got canceled this year for being anti-Vietnam. And literally coming on the air and being like, this is wrong. And having people like Pete Seeger on, who sang The Big Muddy, and just all this anti-Vietnam stuff. And so their show was pulled from the air and it was replaced with the Glenn Campbell Hour. But but they were just super liberal, lefty guys, good guys who managed to have this real sort of square exterior and would get these subversive messages through their show until they got a little bit too overt about it and they were canceled. And then they came back in the 80s. And but just my friend Nell Scavell wrote a great book called Just the Funny Parts about her time writing. She wrote for The Simpsons and Seinfeld and all these shows. And she called Letterman out for sexual harassment and all this stuff. But the first person that like really embraced her and sort of mentored her was one of the Smothers Brothers. She wrote for the new Smothers Brothers Hour in the late 80s. And she was shocked because dudes are usually garbage. But it was just like, oh, hey, here's a good book to read and do that. They're just amazing guys. And it's kind of incredible they got anything done. God,
how interesting. No, I had no idea who they were. I didn't know. I didn't have a clue about whether they were like the Chuckle Brothers, and they obviously weren't like that. So that's a relief.
Actual brothers too, for once.
And on Sunday, I don't know why, but I didn't actually notice any religious programs on at all, and that must be because part of my brain has just shut it out. So tell me a bit about religious programming on Sundays.
It isn't so much a thing now, but absolutely then there was, especially in the Boston area, we have the Catholic hour and we have the Lutheran hour. And so all of these slices of Christianity have their own thing. And there was like Mass for Shut-ins and all these sorts of weird, 4, 5, 6 different religious specials that are all for whatever sect you're in. There's like a specific thing. And the only kids show that would be on Sunday was a show called Davey and Goliath. Have you ever seen it?
No, sadly not.
This is a claymation show about a boy and his talking dog.
A dog barked when you said that.
Yes, that's my producer. No, that's one of my 3 dogs.
Well done, that dog.
Yeah,
perfect timing. Yeah. Anyway,
very
sorry.
Funny. He's very funny. That's my sitcom, My 3 Dogs. But it's a claymation show about a boy and his talking dog that was made by the Mormons and is all about God.
Oh my Lord.
It's really weird. And that would be on in the morning, but the rest would just be filmed at church all day.
Presumably Davey and Goliath is deliberate.
Yes, indeed. And it would be, as a kid who was not religious, it would be like a weird, you'd feel tricked because the first 2/3 of the show is like, Davey, judges the new immigrant in town because he speaks different. And then, someone gives him a speech about how that's wrong. But then the last 2 minutes, the dog would be like, Davey, Jesus was like that. And then it's this whole weird thing. For like the next 5 minutes, it's very weird. Very weird. So Sunday was always kind of just a dead spot of anything interesting.
Oh, well, I feel I missed something there.
Monday, anything strike your fancy?
Right, Monday, I'd sort of kick it off with The Man from U.N.C.L.E.
That is a good show.
Yeah, it was a good show. That was something that my brothers and I actually agreed on, because they tried very hard to get me to like stuff that I really didn't want to like. But I think this is one of the few things.
Did you ever get them to watch anything that you liked?
To be honest, I think when I was that age, there wasn't anything very much, because now I think about it, it was all pretty male orientated. I mean, I think you did better in the States, really, with kind of Lucille Ball and people like that. But over with us, it wasn't till quite a lot later on, I'd say at least 10 years, where women actually started to have their own shows,
What's the first one you remember really watching?
Well, I remember because we had the alternative comedy scene, which started sort of, roughly early 1980s. But before that, you had the traditional comedy circuit, which was like so different, where first of all, you had a pool of jokes that everybody used, and it didn't matter if you did the same as someone else, because they didn't write the jokes themselves, they just heard them in a pub. So no one could really sort of claim ownership of them. It kind of goes without saying that it was racist and sexist, and you had comedians like Bernard Manning, who was like a big kind of northern guy who absolutely did not care what he said, and if kind of a black guy was up the front, he would just absolutely take them apart, and not in a nice way, using the most horrible kind of language and just vile, really. So he and I we didn't really like each other, as you can imagine. And so that was really the comedy circuit that the new alternative circuit was trying to dispense with. And it sort of did, really. It kind of put paid to it in a way, because I think like everyone had just had enough of it being all sort of blokes from up north with beer bellies, slagging off women and slagging off black people,
It was actually called like the Northern Men's Club Circuit or something, right?
Absolutely. It was, absolutely. And there was one woman in the middle of all that called Marty Kane, who she was really funny. And I don't know how she kind of coped, like working with all that lot, but she just seemed to. And she was kind of the first person I noticed, really, because she was very tall, very skinny and kind of angular. So she looked quite funny. But also, she just was great at one-liners, and she sort of held her own. And I remember at that point thinking, oh, maybe women can do this a bit,
It's shocking to me that it took that long. Was it the Comedians you had in the 70s? That was that show where they'd have those guys on?
Yes, indeed.
And even stuff like, when did the Black and White Minstrel show end? 1980? Or something like that.
I know, that was appalling.
But it was very old-fashioned. Like, even here, we had kind of dispensed with that stuff in the 60s.
Oh, I think you were way ahead of us on that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was. And so we lagged behind you, and Australia lagged behind us, because I did a tour in Australia in the early 90s, and they had shows where they were still, people were blacking up in them still.
Wow.
I know.
Wow. It's just shocking to me. Although, to be fair, I'm from the Northeast. I don't know if somebody who was from, say, the southern part of the U.S. would find that shocking. Maybe now, like this year, but not as much as I would, because the culture's so different in the other parts of the country.
Sure.
Obviously awful anyway, but it saddens me that it wasn't until the 70s or early 80s that you're really able to see a woman on television being funny.
You were able to see women kind of in other people's funny things, but early on, women had to kind of be. You had one woman in most sketch shows,
Yeah.
so she had to do everything. So she had to be the sort of beautiful woman with like big bosoms in one bit, and then she had to kind of stuff a couple of pillows up her jumper and be like the fat horrible one as well. So once you started to get shows with more than one woman in them, you thought, woohoo, you know.
The versatility we have.
Yeah,
There's just so much
absolutely.
this. Yeah. It's like, man, you wrote a show with Morwenna Banks, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
It's
Damn.
called Damned. It was about social workers.
I haven't seen it because it's been hard to get here, but I've heard it's amazing. It sounds great. And she was on Absolutely, I think, was the sketch.
She was, yeah, and that was much earlier on.
yeah.
She was like the woman on that, and
Yeah.
she's a really good friend of mine, and she is hilarious,
Yeah.
you know.
She did 1 or 2 episodes of Saturday Night Live here as sort of
Oh,
a
that's
utility
right.
woman
Of course,
player.
she worked in the States a lot, actually.
Yeah, but just wasn't used right. They were trying to use her in that way, that the one woman character way, you know.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you know, so we weren't totally ahead because that was like the 90s.
Well, yeah, I know, but it was, yeah. But you, in a kind of general sense,
Yes.
you
Oh,
were
absolutely.
way ahead, really. I think.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean,
absolutely.
I remember when I went to Montreal, thinking, "Oh my God, there's so many American women comics." You know, with us, there was like one woman go, and then if you're ill, we'll try and find another one.
We have an understudy
Yeah.
and the queen. Those are the other two.
Absolutely. Yeah, the Queen will
Yeah,
do it.
yeah.
She's hilarious.
Yeah, that's all we
Hello.
have. Yeah. That is but the people who were there, very, very funny. It seemed like women had to work harder and come up through the writing aspect, you know, like Young Ones, co-written by a woman. Or like I think of Carolyn Ahern.
Yeah, absolutely. Who was a genius.
Miss Merton,
Yeah,
which I think you did an episode of.
I did.
And it's just so funny, but seemed to have to work a lot harder or write her own stuff. That's the
Yeah.
thing. That option didn't exist here, I guess, in a lot of ways. Anything else on Monday you had?
Payton Place.
Ah,
Now, just because I do remember seeing it, because it was on British telly, but I can't remember anything about it at all. So, you know, revisiting it would be helpful. And presuming vaguely from what I remember, that it was sort of, was it kind of like a drama and a soap opera combined?
yeah. It was a nighttime soap, which was the classier soap. It wasn't this daily thing. So it had a bigger budget and but it's still the super melodramatic. Ryan O'Neal was in this, which I think was the first big thing that he got famous for here. I don't know if he really translated over to the UK, but he became a big movie star and was married to Farrah Fawcett.
Love Story, wasn't he? Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
So this was like his big break where everyone sort of knew him from, but just a really schmaltzy, just kind of show, just overly dramatic and syrupy and
Was it camp like Dynasty or Dallas? And probably not so funny then, was it?
No, I've only rewatched some of it because it's not really my thing, but it doesn't even have that sort of irony watch or like the sort of camp value. It's just not even, it's just doesn't have it. I don't know what it is. It's boring.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. But
Oh, well, I can always cope with half an hour of boring.
that's true, but very popular. So people like boring.
Yeah, they do. They do.
And speaking of women on television, I mean, at 10 o'clock, and I don't know if you picked it, it's outside of the purview of the thing, but I mentioned it because it's relevant to what we were discussing, that Carol Burnett was on. And
Yeah.
that cannot be underestimated as maybe the key reason that we had that difference here.
Yeah.
That her show, and she anchored the show. I mean, it's her show. She came out at the beginning, introduced herself. She's in every sketch. The cast was more than 50% women. That in the mid 1960s and on for, I think, up until the mid to late 70s, that changed everything. Because there was nothing else like it. Yeah. And that's all. I think that is literally the key difference between the two countries. Is we had that.
I think I'm probably wrong here, but was she in any way related to Rowan Martin's Laughing?
She was not. Well, sort of.
I don't know who I'm thinking
Lily
of.
Tomlin, you're thinking of.
Oh, yeah, that's
Yes.
right. Yes.
But Lily Tomlin was in that sort of crew with her. There wasn't a lot of women who were doing comedy or could anchor a special. And so Carol Burnett was one, Lily Tomlin was one, Joan Rivers was one, Phyllis Diller a little bit, but that's kind of it. I can count them on one hand. Lily Tomlin started on Laugh-In, which incidentally, earlier on Man from U.N.C.L.E, there's a little note that says this is the last episode of the series, and this time slot will be Laugh-In next week, a new show.
Oh, really?
So
How
it debuted
interesting.
the week after this, January 15th, 1968. But again, Lily Tomlin was the star of just shown on that show, and she got her own specials, which were actually produced by Lorne Michaels, which is how he started Saturday Night Live. But she was not on Carol Burnett, but they were contemporaries, I guess is what I would say.
Okay, right, of course. There we go,
stuff.
yes.
Anything else that night, or did you move on to Tuesday?
How can I leave her out? I had Lucille Ball in the middle of those two,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I just didn't see it as my eyes were passing over. So yeah, again, I think a sort of something that there just wasn't the equivalent of, you know.
And she made that opportunity herself. Like, she was a ingenue in the studio system. She was in serious movies. She went through the studio training where you're like, we're going to teach you dancing and glamour, and was a pinup. And she aged out and was like, what am I going to do now? I'm going to have my own production company, and I'm going to, her production company made Star Trek.
No, really, I had no idea.
It was a Desilu production. I mean, she had her own studio, and she had her, like, that was the only way to be able to do that. You had to be doing 18 jobs and make your own thing.
Wow.
It's kind of sad.
I know when I started on the comedy circuit in the kind of mid-80s, so many of the guys were doing Star Trek jokes. And I remember one lovely guy struggling one night, and someone shouted out, "It's comedy, Jim, but not as we know it." That absolutely destroyed him. It was, like sometimes you just hear an incredible heckle, don't you? Just finishes whoever it is off. But
they know too. They'll just be like, "Oh, good night, sir. I cannot."
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, I can't. There's nothing I can say. He did literally just head dropped and off he went. You know.
Oh man, that is. I used to tell this on stage, but I was watching a band play once, and they were terrible, and someone shouted out like a gay slur at them, and the singer just like, "Hey man, that's not cool," like, gives a whole speech about how it's not cool to do that, and then a guy in the audience goes, "I'm gay, you still suck." And I was like, they just have to stop playing. Like, there's nothing you can do. You're done. Yeah.
You must have heard that sort of legend about, I think this is true, there's a club called Jongleurs in London, quite early on. Kirk Douglas's son, Heckle, did you hear that one?
No.
Oh, well, that's quite interesting, because I can't remember his name, but he tried doing bits and pieces of stand-up over here.
Not Michael. Yeah.
No, it was one of the other ones. But anyway, he was at Jongleurs, which is a notorious venue where all these city boys would come down after the end of a very hard week on the floor and just all get pissed really quickly. And he was really struggling, and he wasn't enjoying it, and he was quite pissed off about it, And so he just looked at the audience in absolute frustration and said, "How dare you treat me like this? I'm Kirk Douglas's son." And then a guy at the back went, "No, I'm Kirk Douglas's son." And then someone else went, "No, I'm Kirk," until the whole audience was doing it, And sometimes audiences just do that, don't they?
Yeah.
Somehow so on it that you can't quite believe they've been so brilliant.
That's unique, I think, to the UK. Like, that's the one thing I noticed where it was like, it stung more because they would heckle you, but they were doing it they had listened to your set. They had absorbed what you were saying.
They
and
thought,
they didn't like it. Instead of just like, you're not funny. You know.
No, exactly. Yeah.
That was worse. It was worse. Where were we? Tuesday? Anything?
There was something called Experiment, which was like a science program about the weather.
Yes.
And I thought, actually, that should really be on in this country because that's kind of our thing, the weather. But I've never really thought that over there anyone would watch it for a second.
This was on our PBS channel, which is close to the BBC, but not really.
Right.
And so they were sort of known for educational programming. So they would air stuff like this. All of their programming is a mixture of things like Experiment, Weather by Number, and then imported British stuff. So it's very highbrow and probably not the most popular thing, but it would be on. And it's funny because at 8 o'clock, there's literally only two things on. There's that, and then there's a made-for-TV special where it's Jack and the Beanstalk starring Gene Kelly.
Wow. What a contrast.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Which you have to pick. Anything else after you learn about the weather?
Yeah, I thought that, well, I don't know how often this happened, but there was a British comedy on called The Truth About Spring, a comedy film starring John Mills. I don't know if you remember him. The Mills family were a huge kind of acting dynasty.
Okay.
And he had a daughter called Hayley Mills.
Oh, yes, I know Hayley Mills.
She was in pretty much everything with him, really.
Okay.
She didn't often. I think actually she got married to an American, I think, and so she moved over there. He was the quintessential sort of British sort of military type. He always played very reliable, very honest, very noble, very brave kind of characters in war films.
Yeah, Hayley Mills people would know here from The Parent Trap Disney film, and that would be the first thing they saw her in. And then she was in a bunch of sitcoms here later, but I had no idea that she was from like an acting dynasty.
We knew her as kind of like a very sweet, blonde, blue-eyed 8-9-year-old.
Yeah.
So from that age through to kind of mid-teens, when she started to grow up into a lady,
yes,
she would do stuff with him, and then obviously she thought, I must stop doing all this stuff with my dad.
Yeah.
And moved.
As all teenagers do.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. Yeah,
I've never seen that. This is a leisurely idyll about a life on a Caribbean island. It's like John Mills.
Yeah, that's probably dodgy, isn't it?
Yeah,
by the sounds of it.
Sounds
you're
weird.
gonna, in the 60s, anything on a Caribbean island is not going to be.
There's going to be some questionable
weirdness, isn't there?
presentations.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
However, now I want to see it more. Anything on Wednesday?
Wednesday, again, this was actually something I loved. Lost in Space.
Yes.
I loved that, and my brothers loved it, and so we used to watch that kind of religiously, really. I always liked that rather odd-looking doctor that I thought looked like Satan. What was
Dr.
his
Smith.
name?
Dr. Smith.
That's the one.
Yep.
Yeah, loved him.
Have you seen the new one?
No.
It's really good. Dr. Smith is played by Parker Posey.
Oh, okay. Wow.
It's very interesting. I did an episode with the guy that plays Don, Mark Goddard, who's like the young swashbuckler guy in Boston.
Yeah.
He's from Boston, and he moved to L.A. because he got in juvenile trouble here. His dad knew a guy that was in a Western, so he sent him out there, and he got lost in space. Since I started doing the show, I get asked, well, not anymore because we don't have them, but I get asked to moderate panels and questions at conventions and that sort of thing. And I was doing a Q&A with him, and Adam West was there, of Batman fame.
Oh, right. Gosh.
They got into an argument, like a full-on argument, that I had to referee between these two.
What was that about then?
So they were on a show together called The Detectives, and I didn't know this, but Lost in Space and Batman were on opposite channels at the same time, so they were like weird rival shows.
Oh, okay.
So I was like, oh, and then you did The Detectives with Adam West, who's here, and Goddard was like, oh, West ruined that show. He's and then Adam West goes like, I made it better. And at first I thought they were just friends and were kind of, but they were like really angry at each other.
Dear.
And then Goddard goes, our show was like a real hard sci-fi show. It was black and white. It was a serious show. And then because of Batman, season 2, we had to make it a dumb kids show. And he's going
Oh my
And
God.
I had to calm him down and be like, well, it's a beloved show. And, it was very interesting. I was like, these guys are going to fight. Maybe I should have let them. But a fun show and is kind of everything I like about the 60s. And it's that like really weird, sort of surreal, colorful, bizarre, we're going to different planets and, just a fun show. And the new one's very good. Much heavier, though. But you passed up the Avengers.
Well, yeah. To be honest, I tell you why I didn't really like the Avengers was because of... I thought Emma Peel was great, but that guy with the bowler hat used to really get on my nerves. What's his name? John Steeves, the character, yeah. Your quintessential kind of British construct. The way that a lot of characters kind of end up being portrayed around the world. It was just the smugness of him that I just made me want to kind of throw a pie in his face, really.
I could see that. It's something that wouldn't occur to me watching it from here, but when you say that, it's... obviously it would be like, that is interesting.
And also this kind of this lie that everyone seemed to support, which was that he was kind of really attractive to women.
Yeah, no.
and he was too old and he was too smug and he was just too annoying.
Yeah, he looks like a school headmaster or something. Like he's not
He does.
like at least James Bond's like a good looking dude.
Yeah, no, exactly. And you have to have someone that at least, because actually, let's face it, the further back you go, the less actually attractive men had to be, really.
Yeah.
Well, obviously you've got loads of kind of hideous old sort of hulky, sort of yucky, kind of awful. And young women would come along and go, that. And why that was allowed to happen, I do not know. It doesn't happen quite so much these days because women just won't put up with that anymore,
Yeah, it strains credulity.
In big time, absolutely. Unless you're someone like that 90-year-old racing... Bernie, what's his name?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Eccleston, is it?
Yeah,
Him.
yeah.
He's 90. He's just had a baby with like a 12-year-old. It's just so weird. Anyway,
that's very dystopian sci-fi to me, even if there's no science fiction involved in that.
Yeah.
It just seems like Michael Crichton-y somehow.
Absolutely, doesn't it? I know. See, I always wanted, you're never going to get this, but I always wanted it to be the other way round, where you had this kind of, someone like me, basically, and someone like James Bond going, oh my God, you're beautiful. Just for the ridiculousness of it, because that is actually the equivalent of what happens so many times on British telly.
I don't see why you can't do that now. We'll do a period piece set in the 60s. It's a version of the Avengers, but just reversed.
Yeah, indeed, that would be brilliant.
She's got some hunky, dumb sidekick guy who knows Kung Fu, but is just like...
Oh, yeah, who can I have? Who can I have to play him? Yeah, I'll have fun thinking of that.
Yeah, I'd watch that show.
Yeah, I'd watch it as well.
Yeah, I'm into it. Thursday, anything?
What have I got for Thursday? Said the woman with no memory. Oh, yeah, here we go. Oh, The Flying Nun.
Yes. Do you know this show?
I kind of vaguely remember it, but I can't even remember... Could she fly?
She could.
She could. Okay, fair enough.
Sort of.
Do tell.
This was Sally Field. This was her first role, or second role.
Oh my God, yes, of course it was.
So she was in a thing called Gidget before that, which was about a teenage girl, and Gidget stood for Girl Midget. Because she was very small.
Oh, right.
Yep. And so she was already like kind of a TV staple. So people knew her from Gidget, which was a huge hit. It was like a beach party type show. So The Flying Nun was her second show. It's a period piece. So it's set in, I think, the 1920s or 30s in Cuba, which is the weird thing.
What?
Or Cuba, or maybe it's Puerto Rico. And there's a mission there, a Catholic mission. And the nun, I think it's a period piece because the nuns wear those giant habits that they had stopped wearing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The joke is she's so small that with that hat, she could fly.
She can take off. Oh, my God.
And
okay.
So every episode, that fixes some problem. So in one episode, and she has kind of a will they won't they with this really like this Latin guy who owns like a nightclub there, and so he's always trying to help her. So like one episode she has to go fly up and seed the sky with something to make it snow to fool some, like it's completely insane, that show. I'd like to think watching it that they kind of knew a little bit. Watching it, I'm like, there's no way they were totally
They
sincere with
didn't
this.
realise. There's no way they didn't realise that. Yeah, okay. Oh, it sounds great to me.
Weirdly, enormous hit. Had lunchboxes for kids. Kids were bringing lunchboxes with this nun on it to school. And like, just enormous hit. Doesn't make sense.
That is odd. That is weird, isn't it?
Very
well.
strange.
Yeah, no, I'd love to see that again. And the other thing I put for Thursday was Bob Hope's Christmas visit to Vietnam.
Yeah. So I don't know if these aired in the UK. I doubt they did. But Bob Hope did 3 or 4 specials a year. He was like, Mr. USO, let's go. And
Was it always to Vietnam, or was it somewhere?
it would be
else?
wherever there was war. So
okay.
yeah, he was like a horseman of the apocalypse, Bob Hope. But like in the 90s when we had the Iraq War, Bob Hope did a special from Iraq, and they were very old fashioned. He'd bring like
He really went there, did he?
Yeah.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, and I mean, to his credit, he did go to the places. Like in this one, he goes to Vietnam and he brings Raquel Welch.
Well, I know. I was kind of thinking, that would be another good occasion that they could replace Raquel Welch with me.
Yeah.
And I could just turn up and see how pissed off they all were. Honestly, I'm sorry about this, but Raquel's not able to make it. But anyway, I've packed my nice bikini and let's see how we get on.
Well, we don't know how long they've been at war.
No, exactly. They might have actually been quite pleased. And they might have cooked me because I'm sort of no, but also I just think like what we know of Bob Hope really that most people remember, apart from the Road 2 movies, was him presenting Miss World when there was that massive protest that went off in the Royal Albert Hall and people threw flour and screamed, and you sort of almost felt sorry for him because he really didn't know what to do. He couldn't fucking believe it. It was amazing.
He was like a god here in that no one would even imagine doing that at a Bob Hope. Like he just was so revered as the king of comedy and this institution, and by all people from every aspect of life in the political spectrum, because he really locked into that. He's the support the troops guy. He's out there doing the stuff, and his jokes were very old fashioned and not offensive, but just stupid. Like really, literally vaudeville stuff. I had Emmanuel Lewis on the show, who was a child actor, and he was in a show called Webster. He was very, very small, so he showed up in a lot of Bob Hope specials in the 80s. He'd come out and sing and do a dance, but he's like, Bob made us rehearse 6 hours a day.
Jesus.
He's like 7 years old, and they're flying, and he brought him to war zones. Like it would be like Bob Hope, this little kid who's gonna sing and dance, a model, Miss America, and he's like rehearse. Like it just was like a taskmaster with this stuff, and that stuff is fascinating to me.
That is incredible. A poor 7-year-old kid. You would have social workers a go-go these days.
Telling me the UK won't let you take 7-year-olds to war zones? But what about if it's for entertainment?
I don't know. Depends where it is.
Depends on the 7-year-old.
Glasgow, maybe.
Yes.
But yeah, absolutely. Oh, no, absolutely. God, that is...
It's kind of fascinating. And it just... Notoriously, this is a story, and I don't know if this is true or not, but Burbank, outside of Los Angeles, is like Bob Hope land. It's like the airport there is called Bob Hope Airport. And across the street from the house Bob Hope lived in is this massive Catholic church with beautiful stained glass windows.
Yeah.
And the myth is, and this sounds true, Bob Hope's wife was devout Catholic, and basically every time he cheated on her, he bought a new window for this church.
Oh my Lord, that's brilliant.
So people are like, because it's unusually large, this church, and it's literally right across the street.
And it's got 14,000 windows.
I've never seen a church that's 41 stories.
Oh my Lord, that's brilliant. I hope that's true.
It's the only explanation I could think of for that place.
Well, yeah.
But it's, oh boy. So Friday night, final night of the week, January 19th, 1968.
Okay, I went with something that sounds kind of intelligent, but also really fascinating, which was American Memoir, 60 Years of Satire.
Yes, this does sound
fascinating. Would that be good?
I'm wondering, It's weird because sometimes stuff by this point would be self-aware and critical enough that you could get something interesting. And again, this is PBS, so this is our sort of like hoity-toity educational channel.
Okay. You can see which route I've mainly gone down, can't you?
Makes sense.
That's because I'm hoity-toity.
It's true. I mean, that's how you're known here. And PBS would be very happy that you're the target audience that they want to hit. But it may be interesting. They did do some pretty fascinating documentaries and stuff on PBS at that time, and we're doing like a lot of anti-war stuff. PBS at that time did a documentary about abuses that were happening in mental institutions, actually.
Wow.
And sort of blew the lid off it. There was an institution here in Massachusetts that was feeding developmentally disabled kids radiated oatmeal to see what happened.
Just to see what happened. Yeah.
And it was like a government program. This was in the
God.
60s, and PBS are the ones who just blew the lid off it. Like, they were really doing stuff that you weren't doing on TV then. So, and this was that era, this late 60s era.
They sound great.
They are pretty great. I mean, in 1968, that's when Sesame Street started. That's PBS.
Right.
Mr. Rogers, who the Tom Hanks movie recently was about, who was just an amazing person.
Oh God, yes. No, I saw a big review of that. That looks amazing. Yeah.
He was an amazing person. Like, there's footage of him testifying before Congress about the need for funding for children's educational television. And because he was big on, like, well, there are kids who don't have access to things, and we can be in their homes and, you know, help them. And he's just great. There's this Southern senator, and the quote, he goes, "Well, Rogers, I'm kind of a tough guy, but you just moved me." It's like this. It's a real thing. It's not even. It's great. So I might try to hunt this down, because that actually sounds interesting to me. I'd be curious to see.
Yeah, no, it does. It does to me. Yeah. And so, after everything you've said about them being anti-war, I've finished with a British war film.
What movie?
Called 633 Squadron.
Oh yes, I see that.
Which I actually remember watching when I was a kid, and it's basically obviously a British squadron of planes trying to destroy a Nazi fuel plant, which is guarded by the cliffs of a Norwegian fjord.
I mean,
there you go.
Sounds action-packed.
It does, doesn't it? Absolutely. And I think that all those sort of acts of what they call daring do in the Second World War, you know, were just staples, weren't they?
Oh, yeah.
There was like the bouncing bomb. That was another film as well, you know. And it was kind of quite interesting for me, because my little brother married a German woman, and he lived very near where they actually dropped the bouncing bomb, and his father-in-law was a German soldier who was captured during the war, and who ended up in a Russian prisoner of war camp for 7 years after the war, because actually after the war they just hung on to loads of people and they made them just do building work, and he was on bridges. He built loads of bridges. So seeing it all from like both perspectives is just weird, you know. And obviously these sort of films like 633 Squadron, and I'm sure you have absolutely loads of them over your way, they are pure propaganda.
Absolutely.
Really.
Absolutely.
You know.
Yeah, we didn't start getting anti-war stuff till Vietnam. Like, it just wasn't done. And even then, the media we got was coded. It was horror movies that were an allegory, or, MASH, which is about the Korean War.
Absolutely.
You couldn't do it. You couldn't do it contemporaneously. Big reason because the U.S. military controlled the movies made about war. And they still do to a degree. If you want to use any sort of military insignia or any military equipment in a movie, you need a military advisor who has to sign off on everything being okay.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Very weird. Well, that is the week, and I love talking to you about this week. Is there anything you're watching in lockdown, or any comfort shows that you're revisiting, or anything like that?
I'll tell you one thing I loved above everything else, which is kind of interesting considering the article we were talking about at the beginning, but the Chernobyl series. Oh, yeah. I thought that was like the best thing I've seen for such a long time, you know. And I always wonder when I watch these things what level of sort of propaganda's going on there. But I just thought it looked spectacular. It was so interesting. And I remember living through that and obviously not knowing kind of 95% of what you subsequently found out from that, you know, because all of us want to believe that we're sort of in safe hands, don't we? When if we actually really thought about it, we'd all just go, like that, wouldn't we? And,
we're like
hide and get drunk all the time.
1 or 2 steps away from some idiot screwing up and just in a minor way that just kills us all.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What a high note to end on.
Well, exactly. I'm a cheery person at heart, really.
You are. It's great.
Honestly, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. It was, and I learnt so much that I didn't know, which was all like really good stuff.
There you go. That's Jill Brand. She is the best. There is so much stuff of hers that you could check out that's even available here in the States. Buy her books, watch her shows, watch her stand up. Just enjoy her. She is a national treasure, UK. I hope you know what you have there, because you have a national treasure. Speaking of national treasures, I'll be here next week. I'm not saying I'm a national treasure, although the way things are going currently in the U.S., I may qualify as one given how the bar has been lowered so low, but I'm not going to go on a rant about that. Anyway, if you want to get in touch with me, if you have guest requests, I am still trying to get everyone you've requested on the show to varying degrees of success. You can email me at tvguidancecounselor@gmail.com or at ken@icanread.com, or you just reach out on social media. I am at Kenneth W. Reid on all of those, REID, or I am at TV Guidance. So that's where I am. I'll be here next week, and I hope you will too, for a brand new edition of TV Guidance Counselor.
When I transferred over to the States, I became younger, thinner, much more attractive and black.